Subscribe, or it will find you in your sleep.
I'm with one of my mates and two girls at the local weir one night in an outback town in Australia. I'm in the driver's seat. My mate is in the passenger seat and the two girls are in the back. All the passengers are drinking, not me, and talking bullshit and about everything and nothing. I'm telling the story to my mate in the front seat about a past event, and the two girls in the back are talking louder and louder. So I'm talking louder in order for my mate to hear. I turn and look at him as he's talking because it seems like he's not paying attention and he's looking at me strangely. I ask him what's wrong. He looks at me and asks, "Why are you shouting?" I tell him the girls are speaking really loudly. He says, "They aren't talking. Can you really hear that too?" I say, "Hear what?" Then look back into the back seat. I still hear the distinct sound of women chatting and laughing, but I can see the two girls in the back weren't moving their mouths. Their eyes were looking at me in the same strange way as my mate. I can only describe the look as a mixture of fear and wonder. I then realize I can't understand what the women are talking about. They are speaking a different language I don't understand. I look back to my mate with a look of terror and say, "Yeah, I can hear women talking." "Do you?" He goes, "Holy shit. You hear that too?" "Yep. Drive." "Just drive," he said. I start the car and drive. The road is just a two-tire track with branches off to multiple tracks, and my mate is directing me where to go. I'm doing 60 through the scrubs, breaking off small branches and darting down tracks at the last second, trusting in only the directions I was given. The voices fade as we reach the main road. We put our seatbelts on, and I ask, "What the hell was that?" My mate tells me that it was a sacred site where the women of local Aboriginal tribes would gather while the men did their secret men business on the other side of the river. We were always told there were spirits there, but I always thought it was bullshit until tonight. I didn't mention this before, but I was the only white guy in the car. The others were Aboriginals. My mate went on to apologize and tells me that he should not have taken me there. The voices were telling him to get out of there before something bad happened. My family has a very old cottage in the mountains where I like to spend time every summer. Last summer, something really scary happened. Evening, fast midnight. I'm downstairs in my room and I'm reading a book. My grandparents are upstairs. They are probably sleeping. Like I said, this cottage is very old and has thin walls, so sometimes you can hear what you really don't want to hear. For example, my grandparents wake up often through the night because they need to pee. But when they go to the bathroom, the whole cottage shakes, especially when they're on the stairs. Everyone else hears their steps. So I'm in my bed, reading my book, when I suddenly hear some weird noises upstairs, near the staircase. First one short shaking and then steps. But which steps? It sounds like kids' steps without shoes. And what is the most scary? They stop in the middle of the staircase, then nothing. I'm so scared at the moment that I hide under the blanket and try and fall asleep because I'm downstairs and alone. But next morning, my grandparents asked me what I was doing at midnight on the stairs. They both woke up because they heard the same thing, but saw no one. Well, it's not the first weird thing I've witnessed, so I'm starting to believe that we have a very scary cottage. I personally do not believe in the paranormal, but some of the experiences I've had at my dad's house as a teenager sometimes make me think otherwise. My whole family experienced plenty of strange happenings at this place, but the most jarring occurred when I was 17 years old. I rarely visited my dad's, but whenever I did make that hour-long trip into the nothingness of Wisconsin, I was always uneasy at what I might see or hear at night. The house had some very unique features that always struck me as strange. The most notable being a crawl space in my bedroom that connected to my sister's bedroom adjacent to mine. Both sides of this crawl space were fitted with a small door. We never really knew what the purpose of the tunnel was, as it was far too small to use for storage and even too cramped for a grown adult to comfortably navigate. Anyway, this particular night when I went to bed, I heard some very strange noises, almost like a faint whisper or crying. I didn't think much of this because it wasn't uncommon for coyotes to come by the house at night looking to prey on our poor barn cats. The night went on and the noises came and went. Struggling to sleep, I went downstairs to grab a glass of water from the kitchen. When I came back up into my room, I noticed that the door to the crawl space was now ajar and the whimpering had stopped. More than a little startled at this point, I quickly got back into bed and tried my best to fall asleep. Eventually, I was able to fall back asleep, but was later awakened when I felt a sinking feeling at the foot of my bed. I assumed I must have left my bedroom door cracked and one of the house cats had climbed on. I closed my eyes and tried to fall back asleep and was forced awake by the sound of a slamming door. I opened my eyes. I noticed that the door to the crawl space had been slammed shut. Then I quickly glanced at the foot of my bed and saw the outline of a large figure staring at me. The figure was all black with bright white eyes. I got out of bed as fast as I could and ran downstairs and spent the rest of the night awake on the couch. I still don't know what I saw or if it was even real. I was ready to chalk it all up to sleep paralysis, but my sister told me next morning that she was also awoken by the sound of the crawl space door slamming, and that was one of the last times I spent the night there. And if that wasn't bad enough, 5 years later, my dad and stepmom decided to add an extension to the house, and when they were digging in the foundations, they uncovered gravestones from the 1800s. No thank you. When I was 16, I woke up on a Wednesday night at around 2 a.m., and there was a ghostly figure walking up the middle of my bedroom floor. I froze and reached for the light on my bedside locker, but it wouldn't switch on. So as a coping mechanism, I decided the only thing I could do was to hide under the duvet and hope it all went away. After about 10 minutes, I peek out and notice the light is now on. The room is empty, and I managed not to urinate on the sheets, which is always a good thing. The female that was in my room was dressed in black, and I could see the outline of her face. She spoke softly, saying, "Don't mind me." That didn't settle me in any way. In fact, I think it made it worse. Fast forward to Saturday night. I had friends over, and I had a new phone, which about the time was pretty cool because it had a camera on it. We were taking pictures and messing about, and 2 days later, I noticed in one of the photos that this lady was sitting in a chair at my kitchen table, right behind where my friend was sitting. I freaked out. It was her, and I thought I was losing my mind. For about a week after this, I noticed strange things in the house, like the cupboards in the kitchen all being open when I walked into it, the front door being unlocked when I knew I locked it. I had terrible nightmares for weeks as well. I finally bolted it and told my parents what was happening. Once, I had told my parents everything and showed them the photo. They took me to our parish priest, who to my surprise immediately came to our house with us. He opened the front and back doors, said prayers, and blessed the house and said a few words. An interesting thing he said was about the area I live in. He said he'd seen so many strange and frightening things on the hill, which he can't speak about, but claimed what happened to me to be minor compared to other things he had endured. I asked more questions until he finally told me what had been happening and why. We live on a mountainside above a small town, which has become very built up with houses and activity. About 3 miles from this group of houses, there is a castle about 3,000 years old, which is notorious for hauntings and cruel history. I was informed that anyone killed in the castle would have been buried over the land where my house is, and that a lot of activity and lost souls are in the area. The hill I live on is called the Bridal Lone Inn, which is based in Warrenpoint County down in Northern Ireland. The castle is called Narrow Water Castle. Feel free to look into the history and as to why the hill has its name. For the stories, I have heard the hill is called Bridal Lone Inn because while trying to get away on horseback from the castle with his new bride, a knight had his head severed off and the bride was able to still guide the horse along the hill. Hence, the Bridal Loner. Hope you enjoyed this. I've had plenty of other creepy encounters as well. This happened when I was about 6. I lived in this isolated house, so there was pretty much no one else around for miles. We had a car garage and me. My sister and cousin were playing at night at around 10. At one point, me and my sister were trying to hop on my cousin's back, since he was the tallest, and we all ended up facing the garage wall. At this point, I felt like someone was watching me, so I turned, and I kid you not, there was a transparent-looking man standing in front of our house just staring at me. I froze and stared back to make sure what I was seeing was real. We eye locked for at least 4 seconds, which felt like an eternity. My plan was to keep an eye on him until the others also turned to confirm what I was looking at. But at this point, I couldn't hear my sister laughing or my cousin. It was so quiet. I kept calling my cousin's name, but didn't hear any reply. I thought they were dead. I freaked out, lost my eye contact with the ghosts, screamed my cousin's name again, and all of a sudden I could hear them laughing. I turned back. He was gone. I cried, telling my cousin to go back to the house and that it wasn't safe. All he did was giggle. I told my mom about it this year, and she said we had 2 different maids that lived in the guest house who started screaming in the middle of the night because they saw this ghost-looking man. I don't know what to say. I'm afraid of ghosts, and thank God I left that house. I've had so many strange experiences with that place. My cousins and I were playing in my grandmother's yard one summer. She had stopped using her front door years before. The screen door was permanently sealed and a large cabinet blocked the door from the inside. We saw a guy in full suit with a briefcase walking to the front door, and we all called to him to come to the side door. He ignores us, pushes the broken doorbell, and stands there. One of my cousins runs in through the side door and tells my grandma that she has a guest. Meanwhile, we're all watching Soup Guy respond as though talking to someone inside, then smiled, opened the screen door, and walked in. Now, we've never ever seen that door used, but we rush up onto the porch and look in through the door. It's still sealed, cabinet in place. Beyond, we see my cousin talking to my grandmother and yelling, asking where the man was. They say no one came in. My uncle later told us there was a guy posing as a door-to-door salesman who assaulted women in that area in the early 50s. When I was about 3 or 4, a friend of the family brought his daughter over to play with me. We were playing with some pipes that were leaning against a shed, and these heavy metal pipes fell on her and she died right then and there. This part I remember clearly, and it still messed me up to this day as I felt a tremendous guilt since I was the one suggesting to play where we did, but I didn't understand that she had died, and I asked her to play some more. I don't remember the following, but apparently I was playing outside months after the incident, and I came back into the house, ran into my room, and told my mom Kyla needs help, her chest hurts, she can't breathe. My mom was stunned. Apparently she asked me what I meant, and I said I was playing with her, and she told me her head hurts. To this day, my mom was convinced I'd been playing with a ghost. 5 years ago, my mother's gay best friend, basically her brother and my uncle, died from a drug overdose. At the time, him and my mom weren't on good terms, and they lived about an hour away from each other. He was always telling my mom if he died, he was going to come back and haunt her. Jokingly, of course. Well, after he died and was cremated, weird stuff started happening all the time. Every time something would happen, we would just say, "Go home, Uncle David, you're drunk," and then it would stop. One night before we moved, a really weird incident took place. I remember waking up to the sound of something falling and the smoke alarm going off. Me and my stepdad had both rushed into the kitchen at the same time. There was no smoke. The pineapple that was on the top of the fridge was down on the floor and the stove burner was on. The fridge door was swinging open and all the cabinets were open. From behind my stepdad, I heard my mom call from her bedroom, "Go home, David, you're drunk." And she laughed. Almost immediately after she'd said that, the smoke alarm switched off, the fridge door stopped swinging, and me and my stepdad just looked at each other and started closing everything. When I was little, I lived in a trailer in my hometown of Bluffton, Ohio, with my mom, stepdad, dog, and cat. I had my friend Kathleen staying the night, since it was one of the last times I would spend time with her before she moved. It was an unusually quiet summer night. Now I remember this next part very well. My mom and stepdad were asleep in their room down at the far end of the trailer. My dog Cooper was asleep in his cage with the door open, and my cat Smokey was asleep on my stomach. Kathleen and I were still awake, and we just finished a movie. But we were on my pull-out couch, and suddenly the room got chilly, and we see 3 shadows being cast against the hallway wall: a cat, dog, and a human. All the doors in the trailers were closed and the windows were covered. Kathleen grabbed my arm and whispered, "Do you see that?" I was in shock, but managed to squeak out, "Yeah." We stared at the hallway longer to see if we saw it again, but we didn't. Shortly after that, Kathleen moved away, but we still keep in touch. This happened several years ago. I've always liked the paranormal. Shows, movies, books, and the like. Anyway, I think I may have been watching those shows before and I had a sleep paralysis dream. It actually scared me, and I've had multiple ghosts and unexplainable things occur. Anyway, I'm sleeping and I have this vivid dream that I'm a nurse from the 40s. You know, pin-up hair, dark red lipstick, everything is in black and white for some reason. So in my dream, there was this overweight woman killing her patients. They were old, and I guess she wanted them to suffer less. I don't know. I'm also dressed as a nurse and watch her do this. It scares me, and her hauntingly green eyes pierce my soul. She wanted me to do that to one of the patients. While I refused, she came after me. I immediately woke up, and she was right above me when I awoke, and I couldn't move, and I just stared into her piercing green eyes. On another occasion, when I was a kid, I shared a bed with my sister. We had a mirror near the end of the room, so when you get out of bed, you'd see your reflection. It's late. I was woken up to something sitting in front of the mirror, and I'm thinking it's my sister. I vividly recall saying, "What are you doing?" It looked like she was brushing her hair, but it looked damaged or burnt. I was about to tap whatever it was on the shoulder, but immediately looked through the mirror. It was this burnt up skull with burnt hair. Whatever it was cocked their head to the side, confused. My sister was in bed and said, "What?" while not opening her eyes. Whatever this figure was about a foot away from her and I just jumped back into bed and closed my eyes hard. I moved into a larger house when I was in college, and the room I lived in was said to be haunted, according to all the other housemates and the people who had lived in that room before. I slept facing the closet, and 2 girls slept facing the door in a loft bed type deal, with an upper and lower bed, kind of like a giant bunk bed. The girl on the bottom bunk woke us up by yelling, go away, one night. We asked her what happened, and she told us a woman was standing over her bed, whispering to her before turning around and going into the closet. Screw that. But it sounded like a regular case of sleep paralysis, right? Except the other girl and I experienced sleep paralysis in that room quite regularly. It was her first time experiencing something like that. But I had it before, but never this often within such a short span of time. We brushed it off, assuming that sounds from the house disrupted our sleeping cycles until I moved into the upper part of the loft. Mind you, this is a shitty Southern California town, and it would be hot up there. And there was no real airflow after I hung up tapestries for privacy around the border. I would feel someone brushing the back of my neck or my arm or my leg, but only when I was alone in the room. I dismissed it, thinking it was my imagination, and I was in the room so rarely that it didn't even matter. One day, though, I was laying in bed watching Netflix, and a bag of colored pencils slowly slid off my desk as if pulled by invisible strings. This bag was one at the center of the desk. There was no fan on it, and it was far too heavy to be explained by a wind current. I heard the bag crinkling and watched frozen as it was pulled off the desk and onto the floor of the loft where it deflated. Kind of like when you squish the air out of a sandwich bag, only there was no reason for the air to have been pushed out like that at all. It almost looked like someone was pressing on it. And then I felt the arm brush feeling, and I noped out of that room really quickly and spent the rest of the day in common spaces. After that, I was rarely alone in that room, and everyone teased me for being the girl afraid of ghosts. I've had several things happen to me. My first one was when I was around 9 or 10. I woke up and wanted to get some water when I saw this dark fog/shadow figure with red eyes. It went from the hallway down to the kitchen, and I followed it. It sort of disappeared like a gas little by little. This one is more recent. I had to pee really badly and ran upstairs while one of the bedroom doors was open. I passed by and thought I saw my brother for a quick second. I went to pee, then walked back and realized there was no way it could have been my brother. This man was large, like super large. He had a checkered plaid shirt and looked a bit like a lumberjack. This lasted for a split second, and this is important. Fast forward a few years, and my brother is freaked out. He tells me he saw a huge man with a red flannel/plaid shirt, and his height was staggering. He said he thought he saw him through the reflection of one of the mirrors in our house. He was so spooked, and I, oddly enough, was on the toilet when it happened. But when he described the man, I went pale. I'd never told anyone about this man. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. But he described this man to a T. I guess we're living on different planes of existence, and somehow glitches happened. Or maybe he was a ghost. I was 9 years old, and I was at a summer camp for kids, and I had to go to the bathroom. This camp was at a school, and the bathroom was kind of a long ways down the hall from where the camp was. So when I got to the bathroom, it was super quiet. The bathroom was small, and I felt a little creeped out in there because it was cold, and I was the only one in there. I started thinking about ghosts and had a strange feeling that there could be someone watching me. Sure enough, right before I went into the stall, one of the other stall doors opened all by itself. There was nobody else in the bathroom, and I freaked the hell out, quickly did my business, and ran back to where my friends were, and I could still feel a cold presence by me. It was summer, and the air conditioners weren't working right, so it obviously wasn't that. I never really believed in ghosts that much until that day. I'm actually haunted. My family will attest to this. So I have quite a few stories. The favorite one I ended up telling is when I lived in Los Angeles. We lived in what I like to call a half house. The address was 11,800 half, and it was just basically a shack remodeled to be a house. I'll have to explain the layout. Otherwise, you just won't understand. The front door led to the small kitchen with a window that faced the driveway. Then opposite the window was a half wall to separate the living room. We used this as a bedroom because the actual bedroom was always freezing cold and super tiny. It was just off the living room and the bathroom. The bedroom was connected to what everyone called the garage. It only had 2 access points, one from the bedroom and one from the outside by the driveway, just a few feet away from the kitchen window. Well, I am a crazy insomniac, always have been. So there I was laying in bed, staring at my ceiling, while the boyfriend was passed out drunk to my left and our kiddo was opposite him. One night, I started hearing footsteps on the roof, loud footsteps, but despite the flimsy material, it never shook our house. The house was long, not big, just long, but whoever this was managed to run across my entire roof down the long way in just a handful of steps, but always managing to stop right above our heads. I added this to my telling of the creepy crap that happened in the house, to my boyfriend's family when we spent time with them in the weekends. My boyfriend always blew me off. No one believed my stories. After months of this, my boyfriend finally got tired of my stories and decided to piece me wrong. I told him he can't get drunk and that I'd wake him up when the stomping started. He agreed to have no drink that night. The stomping started, I woke him up and he heard it. He jumped up, threw his work boots on with his boxers, and took my giant Rambo knife with him and ran outside. I locked the door behind him, waited, and listened. Then I heard the stomping run from the living room, across the house, and to the driveway. Our driveway was gravel, those stupid white rocks because my boyfriend thought they looked nice, all the way up and down the drive. So when you walked on them, it was a very distinct sound. The thing got to the kitchen side of the house, jumped off the roof, and I heard those rocks just out the kitchen window. I was too chicken to peek through the blinds, and a few minutes later, my boyfriend comes inside and says he didn't see anything except my cat, and that the cat was doing what he always does when he wants to be petted more. I told him the thing ran across and jumped onto the driveway and that I heard the rocks. We never heard the stomping again, but other crazy shit started happening and his family believed me after that. I wasn't old enough to remember, and it's not really my story, but I'll tell it anyway. So it all started at my grandparents' original house, from before they divorced, that my mother grew up in. I was just a few months old and had a baby monitor in my room. The house had a history of being unusual. Weird stuff happened on a not-so-frequent basis. Everyone knew that something was wrong with the house, and most suspected the paranormal. So it's late at night. I can't remember for sure, but it was sometime after 8, and the baby monitor produces suspicious noises inexplicably. The sound of furniture moving loudly across the room emanates from it. The receiving monitor was only on the floor below the transmitter's room, yet the sound could only be heard from the monitor. Moving into my room to investigate, my mother opens the door and the room is unchanged. No furniture is out of place and I'm still sound asleep. Confused, my mother leaves and returns downstairs. And after a few minutes, the sound is heard again. Furniture being moved. Upon investigation, nothing has changed. We still lived in the house for a few years after before moving. One day when I was 14, me and 2 of my friends, Melissa and Susie, were hanging out at Melissa's house, which was a typical 1950s bungalow on your typical small-town USA street. Uneventful summer day, 3 bored girls, nothing strange, no known history in the house, nobody telling ghost stories or psyching each other up. It was at this time Susie had the idea of getting a mirror and trying the old Bloody Mary trick. I can recall thinking this was the most ridiculous thing ever. I mean, a Ouija board maybe, but Bloody Mary is just plain stupid. So after I scoffed, Melissa suggested that we repeat the name of her recently deceased grandmother. I thought it was still dumb, but maybe better than summoning a long-dead English queen. So we grabbed a hand mirror from the pile in Melissa's closet and turned off the light. Trying to be serious, I hold the mirror and Melissa and Susie flank me on either side as we proceed to repeat the name of Melissa's great-grandmother. After about 10 or so repeats, I start noticing something like smoke entering the mirror from the lower right corner. I don't say anything because at first I'm in semi-disbelief. The small ball of smoke then starts to spread like tendril forms, filling the mirror and seeming to take form. At this point, everyone screams simultaneously, and I toss the mirror, and we proceed to scramble out of the closet and describe the exact same phenomenon using our own words. Melissa and I described it looking like cigarette smoke. Susie described it like fog. We are in shock, to say the least, because I think we all expected nothing to happen. The rest of the day was spent in semi-silence. I still think it's crazy and wonder if it is possible that it was some kind of group psychosis or the power of suggestion, or one of us projecting our own imagination into the others. But that is all equally nuts too, especially the group psychosis stuff, because we all saw it at the same time without suggesting it to the other. I know what I saw, and it was something I don't want to ever see again. When I was 13, my mother, sister, and I participated in the AIDS walk in New York. My grandfather, my mother's dad, died of AIDS when my mom was my age. It was a very emotional day for my mom. She was grateful to have my sister and I with her. For a week after that, I felt super paranoid in the apartment. It was so weird, like something was there but we didn't know it was. So I had this feeling for about a week before it happened. I've always randomly woken up in the middle of the night, so when I woke up one night, I didn't think much of it. I look over at the door and there's a figure standing right in front of it. I remember everything so vividly, like it happened last night. It was clearly a man. He was tall, white, wearing an orange shirt and blue pants. I just knew it was my grandfather. I laid there staring, not knowing what to do. I was scared, but almost excited. He was there. This was unlike anything I'd ever experienced before with the paranormal. It felt like forever before he just faded. I was certain he went into my mother's room to see her too. I told my mom about it the next day, but she just wrote me off as me dreaming. But he was there, and I know that I saw him. Back in the late 80s, I was about 5 years old and lived on a large Navy base in California. My friend and I went outside in the morning to play. It was a sunny day, and we parked our bikes and climbed a small embankment to the playground. As we approached, we saw what looked like the shadow of a man, only white, pushing the merry-go-round extremely fast, faster than a person can run. No one else was around that early. We got scared and got back onto our bikes and went about 2 blocks down the street to her house. As we pulled into her drive, we looked over to see the white man running past the road. It had no facial features or details. It was just fast, completely white, and did not look three-dimensional. We both saw it, but nobody believed us. Neither of us ever saw it again, and I lost contact with her a few years after. But I wonder if she still remembers what we saw. When I was in 10th grade, my history class was researching the Great Depression and Prohibition. So we took a field trip to this old brewery that Al Capone used to visit. Anyway, me and my buddy Cooper enter an office, small, with a photo of the old owner of the brewery above the fireplace, desk and lamp in the corner, and we walk in and stand behind the desk facing the photo with the lamp behind us. He looks up and says, "Shit, that bastard was ugly. But with the money he was bringing, I'd screw him too." We laugh it off and we start looking at the desk. I remember the desk looked a lot older than the office. Not glossy, just like a wooden desk that some carpenters threw together in the late 1800s. Next thing I know, I snap out of my dazed desk, admiring state, and Cooper's beside me. I'd say he was whispering, but I could feel the fear in his tone. It wasn't whispering because I knew he was trying to speak louder. He just couldn't. He just said, "Dude, do you hear that?" I listen up and feel the floorboards around my feet moving and the sound of metal rocking. I spin around and see the old lamp shaking back and forth. To this day, me and Cooper haven't spoken about it. We refuse to bring it up. I brought it up once at a bonfire over a few beers and he said never to speak of it. I'm pretty sure it was a ghost. The way the antique moved was unnatural. My family had this get-together in a rented villa at this famous tourism hotspot up a hill. We were having cookouts in the backyard and the sun had just set, so there was still a bit of light, but the sky was dark. There were 2 layers of backyard. The first one was attached to the kitchen, where my mom and aunt had done most of the cooking. The second layer of the backyard was the very back part, and the villa was surrounded by a fence and then dense bushes and trees behind it. It looked beautiful in the daytime when it's bright, but at night it was dark and eerie to even look. I was like 9 or 10 when this happened. I was in the first layer of the backyard helping my mom with the cookout when I saw a woman with long black hair and a long plain white sleeping gown turn her back onto me. She was standing between the bushes and leaning on one of the trees. I thought it was my aunt for some reason because she did have long black hair, and I remember she was wearing a white sleeping gown too. I tugged on my mom's shirt and went, "Mom, look, what is Auntie doing?" My mom didn't say a word, and I continued to call out to the woman, "Auntie, what are you doing?" Imagination. My mom dragged me into the dining room where my aunt was. Her long hair was in a bun, and she was wearing a white floral dress, not a plain one. I was like, "Yep," and my family talked about it for the rest of the night. No one knew who she was. My dad had a sister who died of cancer when he was a teenager. Her name, Betty. My dad was a very private person who very rarely spoke of his younger life. When my oldest sister was about 4 or 5 and I was barely walking and my other sister hadn't been born yet, we lived in an old farmhouse with a long hallway separating the kid bedrooms from my parents' bedrooms. My dad heard my sister laughing and talking outside his door late one night. He goes to check on her, to get her back to bed, and to get her to stop giggling, as he has to go and work in the morning. When she saw him, she says, "Teddy, Betty's here to talk to you." But when he looked, there wasn't anyone there. He'd never mentioned Betty before to his toddler. And it's not like he and my mother discussed his dead sister a whole lot, so it's doubtful that she would have heard the name before. Betty came back when my mom was pregnant with my younger sister. According to my mom, she saw a woman in a hospital gown rise out of the floor and say, "Don't name the child Elizabeth," and disappear. My mom did not name the child Elizabeth. Crazy pregnancy dream inspired by the oldest sister sighting almost 10 years prior? Maybe. About 10 years ago, my mom and I went to stay with her cousin in DC. Her cousin was a pastor at a very, very old church in Georgetown that had one of those houses behind the church that the pastor lived in. I was offered one of 2 rooms, the attic or the room on the floor with the rest of the bedrooms. I picked the latter. My mom got the attic. The first night, she said she woke up with incredible pressure on her chest, like someone was pushing down on her chest with all their weight. She got up and went to the bathroom for a glass of water and went back to sleep. How do you get back to sleep after that? Anyway, later she woke up with the undeniable feeling that someone was staring at her. The next day, she tells all of us this over breakfast, and my mom's cousin just goes, "Oh yeah, it's an old house and dozens have died here. Crazy." I slept like shit for the next few nights and woke up wide-eyed at every creak in the house, which happened constantly. I had a strange experience when I was a little kid. I couldn't have been older than 6 or 7. We had a swing in our backyard at the time, well on the other side of the yard. Our yard bordered an old house that had long been abandoned and probably should have been torn down since it was dilapidated and a huge empty field. My friends, all a few years older than me, would tease me that the house was haunted and that a ghost would come out and kill me. I was a gullible little kid. So while I said no way, their teasers stuck in my head. What if there is a ghost there? So anyway, I loved this swing and I was always on it. It was a way for me to play pretend, as I had an overactive imagination, and outside of my few older friends, I was pretty lonely, and I'd blabber on about whatever I thought of. This one particular time it was at night, and we had the back porch light on since it was pitch black. The light didn't really reach the swing, but as long as I could see the light, it was good in my mind. So I was going on about whatever I was doing and remember saying something like, I was talking to a friend my age, and I for some reason said out loud, "Hello." And that's when I heard a loud whisper, "Hi." It sounded like it was next to me. And when I looked to where it came from, it was in the direction of the damn house. I ran, perhaps faster than I ever had, back to my house, slammed the door shut once inside, and went to my room. My parents didn't even notice how I came in. I never told them, because I know my dad would have flipped out and gone to see who could have possibly talked to me, and I didn't want anything to happen to him. Looking back, I probably should have, because Lord knows what was there. This wasn't me just hearing an imaginary high. It was very real. Reasonably, it was probably some homeless guy or other neighborhood. The town I grew up in was pretty rough after all, as it was a lie in the Inland Empire back in the 90s. And there was your fair share of drug addicts who'd moved through the area, as well as a lot of young kids you'd hear about being found by the cops hanging out in people's backyards drinking. The one thing I'm sure of, though, was that it wasn't my friends, because they would have never let me hear the end of it if they saw how fast I ran. I'm still friends with one of them, and I remember bringing it up to him when we were both adults. He shook his head and said, "No way, man. That house scared us too, and we heard creepy things." Where do you think the stories came from? I'm not sure now. Perhaps it could have been something I couldn't explain. When I was a kid, my parents would find my room with the lights on and the door open after every night. They questioned me about it, and I said the woman who visits me at night does that. Confused, they had me describe the woman and decided that it sounded like my great-grandma, who was dead. They didn't know what to do. They tried moving me to a different room, and the same thing happened in my old room. Eventually, they ended up replacing all the furniture in my room, the bed, the desk, the bedside table, but it was only when we got rid of the dresser that it finally stopped. The dresser had belonged to my great-grandma before she passed. At a friend's house, which is older and not well maintained, there was a very large staircase to the basement/rec room that had a curve at the bottom and rickety steps. On my second step down, my sock slid right off the step and started to fall down this long, curvy wooden staircase. As I'm falling, I'm physically feeling myself being lifted off the steps like there are hands picking me up and I'm actually floating down. When I open my eyes, I'm laying on the ground on my back. No pain. Didn't even feel anything except this weird sensation of having hovered over every single step around the curve and placed on the ground. Friends didn't hear a thing because no noise was made. I am certain someone or something was looking out for me that day. I'm an EMT and I worked at this retirement facility during the night shift. The third floor was haunted as hell. On one of my shifts, I walked past this door and it was slightly ajar. The room had been recently vacated due to the passing of one of the residents. I thought nothing of it. Someone must have been through to clear out the recently deceased belongings. I locked the door and resumed my patrol. Next hour, the door is open again. I'm thinking to myself, what the hell? I'm sure I locked this door. I walk inside, look around, and make sure no one is present. I make sure that I deliberately lock the door. That following hour, the door is open again. The hairs stand up on the back of my neck. I don't even bother going inside the apartment at this point. I lock it and move on. Now on the opposing side of the building, there is this chapel. The lights of the chapel are always turned off at 6 p.m. every night, and the crucifix that is a plug-in is always unplugged at the same time. On my previous 2 rounds, the chapel was dark. This round, however, the only crucifix was a light. Screw that. I left the 3rd floor and never to return. I didn't actually go back to that job because of that night, and I legitimately get chills whenever I recount this story. A couple of years ago, I was leaving my sister-in-law home. She still lived with her parents at the time. Their house is about 20 minutes away from mine. It was about 11 p.m., and though it's a main road between 2 towns, it was pretty quiet. About 3/4 of the way there, we came to a part of the road that has a gradual hill that ends at a bend. The road isn't that well lit, and up ahead, I can see the lights of another car approaching. So I dipped my headlights and it continued towards us. As it got closer, I suddenly realized that it was half to 3/4 of the way across the line on my side of the road. I always imagined in those sort of situations I would just swerve out of the way into the hard shoulder, but for some reason I froze as it continued to come close at speed. When it was almost directly in front of me, I braced myself for impact. The lights came right up to my side of the car, but when it should have hit, they seemed to disappear. Heart racing, I somehow had the sense to look back in the rearview mirror, where I observed the red taillights glowing for a second before everything going dark on the road again. To this day, I don't know what happened, but I'm glad I had a witness with me, my sister-in-law, because otherwise I'm sure I would have convinced myself that I was just imagining things. The road is commonly driven at fast speeds, and as such there have been a lot of accidents over the years. When I told my wife about it, she said that a guy from where they lived, her parents, had died there a few years before that, after getting out to push his car that had broken down and been crushed by a car that came from behind and didn't see them until it was too late. Like I say, I can't explain what happened, but it still freaks me out a little to even think about this now. I have a few stories, from figures at my bedroom door and in my bathtub to footsteps of the deceased, but the one that sticks out is the one that almost made me break down. I was in San Angelo and the adults went drinking because every 5 or so years when Dad comes home, it's party time. I was underage, so I got to babysit the sweetest 3-year-old boy, Timmy, and the 1-year-old, Jordan. Jordan was asleep and me and Timmy were sitting out back on the porch, swinging, talking. Suddenly, he starts crying and points to the back door, which was eyed open. Now, San Angelo is a very small place, the kind of place where you leave all your doors open. No big deal. But when Timmy said in broken toddler speak that someone was walking through the back door, I started to freak out. He took me by the hand and went inside. He walked me all the way to Jordan's room and just broke out into a terrible fit, saying in toddler speak, "Grandma, Grandma." Later, when the adults came home, they told me that Jordan's room and Timmy's hair smelled just like their recently deceased grandma. Apparently, Timmy had barely just started to realize she wasn't coming back, and I guess seeing her broke him down. My dad got a job in Charleston and his boss put him up in his house. Apparently, the subdivision was built on old plantation lands. A lot of that city is thought to be haunted because of the slave trade. One time when he closed up the office, he felt someone was behind him. It got cold and the hairs on the back of his head started to rise. He heard footsteps and saw a shadow descend on him and turned around ready to defend himself, but there was no one there. He said he didn't even lock the doors that night. Also, his air mattress used to deflate constantly, not from some hole, but because the cap was unscrewed each time. He even tried to tape it to no avail. Also, a friend of my parents had to have his house cleansed because he would be fondled at night by something that wasn't there. He'd wake up with bruises and hand marks on his legs and privates. Pretty sure it was sexual in nature, which creeped him out even more. His wife corroborated the story with them. And after the cleansing and moving, they didn't have any problems anymore. Back in middle school, I was with my friend at his grandma's house. We were in the basement in his room. I was sitting on the bed and he was sitting on the floor looking at the TV playing Xbox. This was back when people still had home phones. This phone was one of those cordless ones. He had it on the headboard of his bed. It was one of those headboards that had a shelf. For some reason, it flew off the charging dock it was in and flew all the way across the other side of the room without anyone touching it. Me and him were the only two people in his tiny bedroom. No one believes us to this day. We still wonder how it happened. I always had a funny feeling at that house. It always gave me the creeps. A couple of years ago, my girlfriend and her sister Sydney and her father were out for dinner. My girlfriend mentioned that she had seen a ghost in their house the other day. We don't know if it actually is a ghost. And anyway, she said that she had been seeing the ghost for a few years now and always in the same spot, in the corner of the living room behind the TV. It is just a black figure, almost human-like, but not exactly, with gigantic yellow eyes that are wide open. It has no features except for a huge circular mouth with red lips surrounding it. This time, seeing the ghost had particularly scared her because it was more in the center of the living room than usual. Sydney looks up and says, "Oh, that? I've seen that. I see it in the kitchen though, and in the basement. It just stands perfectly still and watches me at night." Sydney then proceeds to tell us about the time when she was sleeping in her room. She woke up in the middle of the night, and when she opened her eyes, she saw her maths teacher standing in the corner of her room. She was so scared, all she could do was stare and wouldn't move. Eventually, the sun started coming up and she somehow fell asleep. When she woke up, her maths teacher was gone. The house used to be where a cult lived before they had moved in. I don't know much about the cult at all, but I do know that before they bought the house, all of the walls and ceilings were painted black and I absolutely hated it there. My boyfriend lives in a Civil War era plantation on a huge farm. The place had a weird vibe to it. None of the animals will come upstairs. If you bring them up, they'll start shaking and dart back down. My boyfriend won't even go into one of the bedrooms. Slave shackles are still hanging up in the basement. The place has apparently been pretty dormant as far as paranormal activity goes for the past year. I've had a few odd experiences. My boyfriend says that it always gets more active around the holidays though. In November, right before Thanksgiving, I was staying the night with him. I was about to fall asleep and I heard something outside. At first, I thought it was the pack of coyotes that roam around the back of the farm, but then I heard it again, a few seconds after the first time, and it was definitely not a coyote. I immediately woke up and was aware of my surroundings, and I heard it again. It was a woman outside calling for John. She sounded so panicked and distressed. I heard her call a few more times, and I could hear the voice moving around the yard. I was creeped out, but I cuddled up to my boyfriend and went back to bed and told my boyfriend about it in the morning. He said that was a new one. Fast forward to exactly a month from my experience. I wake up, and the first thing out of my boyfriend's mouth is, "Remember a few weeks ago when you heard a woman calling for someone? What name was it? John?" "I heard it last night. I set a reminder on my phone for the next month, but nothing happened." Really eerie. I've been trying to find the history of the house to see if a John lived there, but I find it quite challenging to do so. Every now and then, my friend would sleep over at his grandparents' house, just to spend a little bit of quality time with them throughout the busy school year. One night, my friend was having trouble sleeping, so he was in and out of sleep throughout the night. One night, he awoke in the middle of the night to see a chubby little child standing in the corner of the room, looking at him. At this point, he thought he was dreaming or just seeing things, so went back to sleep, not really freaking out too much. Fast forward to about a week later. My friend has a family dinner, and his cousin is present. He approached his cousin to tell him the story about what he saw when he was at the grandparents' house. Following telling him this, his cousin started shaking a bit and immediately asked him if he was screwing with him and that it wasn't funny. My friend replied no and asked why. His cousin saw the exact same thing as a kid when he slept over his grandparents' house months before, but thought it was just him seeing things. They both freaked out, teared up a little bit, and didn't finish dinner. Pretty much screwed with my head for a bit after hearing this. When I was 11, I lived in New York, but it was the last day before we moved. My brother and I shared a room, and we decided to have some friends over to spend the last night we were going to be living there. Later that night, we were laying in our bed. My brother and I also shared a bed with our friends vertically so that we could all fit. The TV was right in front of us, with a door cracked to the left of it. To the right was our toy bin filled with Nerf guns and a window right above it. These are all important later in the story. Around 1 or 2 a.m., we heard a noise that's very difficult to describe from the hallway, outside the half-cracked door. The best way to describe it would be a loud noise, with a sort of bass that was like nothing any of us had ever heard before, and we could all tell there was something strange happening by the expressions on our faces. About 30 seconds later, the TV shut off, the door slammed, and the window shut. We had it open because the house was very hot, and all of this occurred at the same time. My brother instantly hid under his sleeping bag out of pure fear, and it was almost like he was in a state of shock. He was clenching his eyes shut and wouldn't respond to any of us, no matter how much I shook him and tried to get his eyes open. My first reaction was to go to him because he was my older brother and I was seriously freaked out. This is when people think my paranormal experience is fake, but I can't say I blame them. It sounds like something from a cheesy, scary movie. Anyway, we had a box of cookies beside our bed to snack on for our all-nighter. And I left an open package near my feet at the end of the bed because I was full. Soon we were being pelted by cookies. So I picked up a cookie that hit me in the blanket and bit into it. It tasted like an ordinary cookie. And soon we noticed it wasn't cookies being thrown anymore. It was the Nerf shotgun shells and new Nerf darts from our toy bin full of Nerf guns. These weren't thrown for long. The last thing thrown was the TV remote, which was aimed at me. It hit the blanket and I was holding my eyes shut because I was so scared. Eventually, one of our friends rolled off the bed and turned the light on, and everything stopped instantly. We don't know who was throwing any of that stuff. Several things have happened to me, but there are two that really stick out, both occurring in my current house. I was about 12 and had a dirty habit of not closing my closet door. My mom would say to me, "You better close it." Grandma used to say things would enter if you don't. I brushed it off and never bothered to shut the door. One night, I had a sleepover with a bunch of friends, and we were all sprawled around my room. I let my friends and cousin have my bed, and I was sleeping on a mattress that was against my room door, which was closed in the middle of the night. I woke up and saw a tall man into my closet. I thought it was my dad until I realized that the position I was sleeping in didn't allow anyone else to enter my room as the door could not be opened. The second story. I was a bit older this time, perhaps 15 or 16. It was after school and I was lying on my bed doing some homework. I could see, out of the corner of my eye, that someone was standing at my door watching me. It wasn't just a shadow. I could literally see a person there. I looked up and it was gone. Once again, I thought it was my dad, who was just come home early and who had been checking in on me. Not 5 seconds later, though, I heard a crashing coming from the kitchen. It sounded like all the pots and pans had just fallen onto the floor and they were being smashed around. When I arrived, everything was normal. The crashing sounds happened every now and then. Even my parents have explained it. The same thing always happens. We would run out to check, but nothing would be damaged. Bonus, I was on a school trip to Kuala Lumpur, and at the hotel we all slept in pairs. On the first night, my roommate and I were getting ready for bed when we heard knocking on the door. We looked through the peephole, but there was no one there, so we chalked it up to the rest of our schoolmates messing with us. It happened several times until we opened the door to tell them off, only there was no one around or in the hallway. The next day at breakfast, we're all recounting the story to our friends, and a pair of roommates looked at each other uneasily and said, well, at least your knocking didn't come from inside the cupboard. I was staying in a student accommodation that was rumored to have been an asylum way back, although we never knew for sure. What we did know is that the place was strange. It had a really creepy vibe about it, and a few of us experienced strange things. One guy kept waking up at 3 a.m. every night, and I used to hear running on the floor above me. I thought it was just people messing around. However, when everyone moved out of that floor, the running kept on happening, usually around midnight. Even though no one was there, my friend visited one weekend, and although he's not really into supernatural stuff, even he was creeped out by it. The weirdest experience I had, however, happened on my last week staying at the place. I was well aware of the spirit that would follow me from the room next to mine to the door at night where I had been to the kitchen or the toilet. I became accustomed to it, even if it was creepy as anything. I'd also been aware of entering my room once or twice, and my posters on the walls had the habit of falling down. Anyway, this night I was awake at 3:30 a.m., and I just get this overwhelming feeling that there is someone standing right at the edge of my bed. It was as if they were standing right next to me, just watching me. I was absolutely petrified, and the only thing I could do was cower under the covers, turn my back to it, just sit there. It was absolutely terrifying. Eventually, I made it off to sleep again, but it really freaked me out. Thankfully, it was the only time it ever happened, but once was enough for me. Back home, my dad occasionally sees a face staring at him from when he's laying in bed. Only momentarily and always just before my mom comes into the room. To make it stranger, our neighbor's room through the walls to my mom and dad's bedroom has had some freaky things over the years too, such as stuff flying off the shelves, not falling, flying off. It's got to be linked. Also, we were going to do some urban exploration. Me and a couple of other guys from work, we went to this abandoned RAF airfield where the guy driving mentioned he'd seen some freaky stuff. He told us he felt a large weight in his bag while he was walking around, and he showed us a picture of him in an orb attached to the bag. Obviously, that's what the weight had been. So we're walking with the flashlight turned on our phone. As we get closer, we just feel this horrific feeling. It's hard to explain, but it's like the space around you is occupied, or that you're being watched and not alone. You could see the dark bulk of the building in front of us. There were two of us with our torches on, myself and another guy. The other guy's phone started to cut out as we walked closer. He restarted it and it would cut out again. It has never done that before or since, and we ran away from the building, and it worked fine for the rest of the night. Apparently, our AF airfields are covered in spirits. There are tons of stories of ghosts and spirits in that area. I think it must have been because of all the crew who never made it back. When my oldest daughter was around 3, she started talking about someone called Alex. We just put it down to the usual imaginary friend sort of stuff and never really thought much about it. Then there were some strange occurrences going on in the house. Her electronic toys would randomly start up during the night. She was in a cot bed at the time, so it wasn't possible it was her, unless she jumped the side of the cot bed and climbed back in, which she couldn't do. One of the weirdest things was when I was getting her ready for a bath. Normal routine was to take her dirty clothes off on the upstairs landing, then throw the dirty clothes over the banister onto the floor at the bottom of the stairs. There was nobody else home at the time, except me and her. When I went downstairs after the bath, expecting to pick up the clothes at the bottom of the stairs, I found them sitting on the floor of the kitchen, which is a few meters to the left of the house. It was physically impossible for the clothes to end up where they did. The icing on the cake was when we happened to mention about the little one's imaginary friend to the next door neighbor. They had lived in their house since it was built, same time ours was built. And when we told them about their friend being called Alex, they informed us that the original owner of the house was called Alex and he had passed away in the house one night while watching TV. The neighbors could well have been pulling our legs, but they were an elderly couple who were always very sincere, and I have no reason to believe that they were just trying to wind us up. In time, she stopped talking about Alex, but seriously creeped us out when we found this out from our neighbors. We never mentioned anything about it to her as she got older, and certainly wouldn't tell her about Alex having been a deceased owner of the house. There was never any sinisters going on, just little things that seemed to defy logic. This certainly did make me wonder, though. A few years ago, one night at around 3 a.m., my wife and I were sleeping, and I feel myself slowly wake up from a really deep sleep. My eyes started lifting up, and as soon as they did, I focused on the lamp on my dresser, and it slid off and shattered to the floor. My wife quickly sat up and looked at each other horrified. My wife and I quickly sat up, and we both looked at each other horrified at the startling noise. We both agreed we'd clean it up in the morning and went back to sleep. The next morning when we woke up, the lamp was at the foot of the bed, about 5 feet from where it fell, completely intact and not broken at all. We were both still trying to make sense of it. Before my girlfriend and I moved in together, my girlfriend lived alone in the house she owned. During the course of our dating and me spending the night, she finally explained some of the weird stuff going on in her home. Weird banging sounds happening at all hours, other weird sounds, seeing things from the corner of your eye. There were even a couple of times where she saw something walking around the house. She described it as being a robed figure, almost like the Grim Reaper. There was also the feeling that something was watching you from behind. You know, that same feeling that causes the hair on the back of your neck to stand on end. But the worst was this constant foreboding feeling coming from one of the unused bedrooms. These happenings scared her so much. Simply explaining it caused her to start crying. Now I'm a skeptic about these things. I'm a guy that would watch all these paranormal shows and find the logical reasoning for things happening. Since we were just dating at the time and I really liked her, I wanted to impress her. I wanted to show her my bravado and lack of fear for the thing in the room. "Get out of the house, you asshole!" I yelled into the room. "Do not bother her again, you hear me? Or you'll have to deal with me, and you don't want to mess with me." Oh, big mistake, really big mistake. I spent the night at my girlfriend's. Sometime in the middle of the night, I suddenly woke up to a night terror. I'd had a couple before, but I didn't experience anything crazy. But this instant felt intentional. It felt like I had poked a bear, and it wanted to show me that it didn't want to be messed with. I woke up to being paralyzed, heart throbbing, being able to see and hear what was around you. I could feel my girlfriend lying next to me, and I could hear her breathing. That wasn't the scary part, though. The scariest part was hearing. Yes, hearing. Something run out of the room and down the stairs away from me and towards the unused bedroom. I could hear it make its way through the house. It's a small house, but whatever. I desperately tried to get out of this night terror. I tried telling myself it was a dream. I tried praying. I desperately tried calling out my girlfriend's name. I knew it was a night terror, but even still couldn't get it out. Every time before, I could get out of a night terror by reminding myself what it was. She somehow heard my whisper calls and woke me up. I didn't go back to sleep that night. Both my grandfather and my grandmother have told me this story in almost the exact same way. Neither of them know the other has told me, so I tend to believe them. My grandfather had 2 sisters who were twins. He was only 2 years older. As teenagers, just for grins, they decided to make a pact. They each promised one another that the first one to die out of the 3 of them would try to make contact with the other 2 remaining siblings just to see if the afterlife was real. Some 30 years later, one of my grandfather's sisters dies in a car wreck, and about a year later, my grandfather says he would receive a phone call from his remaining sister. This was just her checking in and catching up. What was weird about this was that my grandfather owned one of those really old-timey telephones where you pretty much speak into a box on the wall and hold the earpiece to your ear. He told me that this was only when his still-alive sister would call him. He would round the corner of the house on the way to pick up the ringing phone, only for it to stop ringing and for him to see the earpiece dangling by the cord. The only time this happened was when his only remaining sister would call him. Creepy stuff, man. My grandparents live in a large house in a really, really small town in Mexico. The house is really big. It has a room that is isolated from the rest of the house. It has really small windows, so it's always dark and cold. Anyway, my aunt and uncle lived in another city and often visited my grandparents. They always stayed in that room. My cousin, 3 years old at the time, stayed with them. One night, when most of the family were staying there, my cousin started to scream really loud and started yelling, "Tell him to go away." He doesn't want me here. Her parents managed to calm her down after taking her to another room. She said she had seen a little kid and that he was really scary. Everyone dismissed it as something a little kid made up. About 3 years later, my grandma's sister also visited and stayed in that room. The next morning, after staying in the room, she told my grandma that she hadn't been able to sleep, but the little crying kid kept waking her. My grandparents asked her where she had heard the kid, and she said in the far right corner of the room. The first incident with my cousin was 15 years ago. The one with my grandma's sister was around 12. And 6 years ago, my aunt also heard the crying in the room. She was unaware of the other incidents and obviously freaked out. I have never had anything happen to me or heard anything in the room, but about a month ago, my cousin brought her 1-year-old daughter to my grandparents' house. She is starting to walk and understand a few words, and I love to keep her entertained and play with her while my cousin eats or whatever. So the little tyke was walking with me, holding her hand. She starts walking towards the room, and I remember what happened there before. She goes in, and just to be funny, I ask her if she wanted to play with the little kid in the room. She started walking towards the far right corner. She started pointing towards the corner, and as soon as we got to it, started crying. It was at that moment that I picked her up and bolted from the run. I haven't been back there since, and I'm still scared to go near it. So my dad and my pregnant stepsister were at the house when my stepsister's friend and 3-year-old son came over. The boy went off and started playing. They heard him laughing and giggling to himself, so they went over and asked him who he was talking to. He replied, "Shamer." Everyone was just confused and went on with their day. Later, he keeps doing it and came back and said that he was playing with Shamer again. My dad got curious and asked him who Shamer was. The boy walked up to my stepsister and pointed at her and said, "Shamer, kettle." Now the weird part, my stepsister's name is Cheyenne and her mom's name is Gretel, like Hansel and Gretel. Gretel passed away in September 2014, and this was roughly the start of 2015. So the little boy was supposedly playing around with the ghost of my stepmom. One of my favorite stories would have to be the spirits in my former friend's house. There were 2 shadowy figures in the hallway and 2 bad spirits upstairs. One day, me, my friend, her mom, and her grandma are all sitting at the back room of the house next to the staircase. My friend was 6 months pregnant at the time, and she went off to use the bathroom. Her grandma went outside to smoke a cigarette, and me and her mom are sitting there talking when we start hearing the sound of a music box / baby mobile / lullaby toy coming from upstairs. There was nothing upstairs at the time except my friend's brother's bed and clothes. At night, me and my friend's mom would sit up and watch the 2 shadow men walk up and down the hallway. They'd walk out of the bathroom, which I never went alone into because things would fly off the shelves at me, and cross the hall into my friend's dad's room, and they'd stand at the end of the bed and watch over him whilst he slept. If he was drunk and high, they'd shake their heads and you could feel their sadness. One night, we heard someone whispering in the dining room, and of course, no one but me and my friend were there. We grabbed our shoes and keys and hauled ours out of there. I lived in a weird house as a kid, which resulted in chairs being moved into other rooms when I was the only one home. Kitchen cupboards opening late at night when no one else was awake. And I could be sitting on the computer in a lit room at night and watch as black clouds would float through a closed door and sit suspended in the air across the room from me. I heard footsteps that would walk outside my door and loud breathing. I was so terrified as a child that I ended up sleeping with my music playing so I could tune out the noises. I still to this day can't sleep without music, and I probably have convinced myself that most of it wasn't real as I aged if I wasn't certain that something was happening. It was around 11 a.m. in the morning, and my younger brother and I were waiting at home while my mother was out doing jobs. We were waiting for her to come back to pick us up. So we were sitting by the front window watching for cars, and then we heard the radio play from my brother's room. We both didn't understand why it was on all of a sudden. So we walked up to my brother's room. My brother hid behind me and I had to walk into the room first. And the second I crossed the threshold, it went silent. On closer inspection, it wasn't plugged in and there were no batteries in the back of it. There was no logical explanation for it playing, and my brother, a young boy, and my brother, a young boy, had a bunch of Matchbox cars and an old car playmat. And my brother, a young boy that had a bunch of Matchbox cars and an old car playmat, swore and declared he had parked the cars neatly on it in lines. And when I went in there, the cars were thrown all over the room. Luckily, we moved out that house, but my brother and I still remember the radio saga clearly to this day, and it's pretty much the only reason I know I wasn't completely crazy as a kid. I lived in one particular house a few years ago where we always suspected there was some sort of supernatural activity going on. We'd leave items in places and come back to find them gone. We'd leave a room to find the door closed on its own, seeing figures and shadows, that sort of thing. However, one incident topped all of these. I was laying in my bed one night, reading just before going to sleep, when all of a sudden, the room temperature seemed to drop, surely followed by that gut feeling you get when you suspect that something isn't quite right. Curious as to why this happened all of a sudden, I lifted my head to scan the room to see what was up, only to encounter a large black hole situated at the foot of my bed, hanging slightly ajar from the far wall. I had no idea what the hell this thing was. I can only describe it as an absence of anything, like there was nothing there. It felt so cold and truly evil. Thankfully, not being completely paralyzed by fear, I remembered reading somewhere once that ghosts, spirits, and whatever else can only mess with you if you invite them in. So I yelled at this thing to go away and that it wasn't welcome, as well as a whole bunch of other rude expletives. After a while, the thing converged in on itself. And that horrible feeling seemed to disappear along with it. I still have yet to explain what is most likely the strangest thing that's ever happened to me. I also once messed around with a Ouija board. Those things are really not as fun as everyone else puts them out to be. I was driving home from work one night when I see a little girl on a tricycle riding across the street and into some woods that drop off into a creek. I brake and skid to avoid her and walk to where I thought she fell. I see no one, and a cop pulls up and asks me what I'm doing. I tell him that he was the person I needed and that I just saw a little girl riding her tricycle across the street heading into the area where it dropped off. He then told me right away that I see what some other drivers see here. It was more than 40 years ago that a child was killed riding her tricycle across that section of the road. Others have seen her multiple times, sometimes walking, other times with her tricycle. After some construction brought changes to that section of the road with expansions and barriers, all sightings of her ceased. I used to live in a house that backs up to a big public open space where there are all hiking trails, lots of joggers, and people walking their dogs. Anyway, one night, I had a kind of creepy dream that an old lady came into my room and was trying to get me to come outside. The dream woke me up, so I got some water and turned off my fan because it was cold, and then I fell asleep again. I went right back to the same dream with this old lady coming into my room and calmly saying I have to go outside now. I kept telling her no, it was too cold, and I woke up again and my fan was on. I figured I must have thought I turned it off or the button got stuck. So I got up, turned it off, and went back to sleep. This time I had the same dream, except she was much older looking, and in this one she was really agitated. She kept telling me to go outside. I got up in the dream and followed her into the hallway. When I got to the hallway, she wasn't there, and then I woke up, and I was actually standing in the hallway. I've never ever walked around in my sleep before or after this. Also, my fan was on when I went back to my room. At this point, I was so freaked out, I got something to eat and watched TV for a couple of hours. I went back to bed around 5 or 6. The dream didn't come back. The messed up part is that a couple of days later, I saw there were police cars in the open space, and I asked my mom what happened, and she said they found an older woman who was reported missing a few days ago. She must have had a heart attack or stroke or something on the trail by my house, and they had only just found her body. When I was 10, I moved out of the room me and my brother had shared since I was born, and into the recently renovated attic. It was a great room, long and narrow, with large bay windows at either end. For reference, think of Kevin's room in Home Alone, only slightly less awesome. At first, it was great. I had my own space. I could stay up late when everyone else in the house had gone to bed, and I had my own TV. Almost immediately after I moved in, I would have vivid, recurring dreams in which I would wake up early in the morning and sit by the bay window overlooking the backyard. There would always be a woman sitting alone on our patio set. She had a pale bluish glow to her, as if she was lit by the light of the moon, even on nights when the moon wasn't out. And I remember her being very still, barely moving at all, sitting with her back to me. Although I did not know exactly what I was seeing. I felt very unnerved by her presence and would make a special effort to remain perfectly silent while I watched her. For a time, that was all the dream consisted of, silently watching this pale woman sit at our patio. One night, after I had been living in the attic for several months, I had the dream again. It played out as usual, with the pale woman sitting with her back to me while I watched her in silence. This time, however, as I shifted positions, I knocked the TV remote control off the bay window seat and it fell to the ground, turning the TV on. The TV bled loudly for a second before I retrieved the remote and turned it back off. When I looked back down the bay window to the patio, the woman was no longer turned away from me, but standing and looking up. I had never seen her face before and it was horrifying. She was a hideous old woman, looking up at me with a look of rage, and I nearly pissed myself in fear. I covered my eyes for a second, hoping she would simply go away. And when I opened my eyes again, I saw the pale woman walk through the wall into my house directly underneath where I was standing. In a panic, I ran to the stairs that led to the main floor so I could hide in my parents' room. When I got to the top of the stairs, there she was. She stood at the bottom of the stairs looking up at me with murderous intensity. I let out a final girlish scream and woke up in my bed, soaking in a pool of cold sweat and piss. And I never had that dream again. I'll give you a bit of backstory first. When my mother was 13, her grandfather was walking in front of his house when he had a massive heart attack and ended up dying in the front of the local fire station. Go forward about 15 years later when her grandmother was hit hard with Alzheimer's and she died 3 weeks later with her sons, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren all around her. My parents, brother, and I have lived in my great-grandparents' house since '98. And when I was 16 or so, I saw a ghostly woman in her wedding dress walk through our kitchen and then phase through our back door. I, of course, freak out and asked both my mother and brother if they had just seen what I saw. Of course, they didn't see anything. And when I look up to the top right corner of our living room, I saw the wedding day picture of my great-grandparents smiling at me. I'm basically panicking at this point, but proceed to push it into the back of my head. Later that day, when my father gets home from work, I begin to walk upstairs when I notice a 6'1" shadow pop up behind me. Being nervous, I look back again, and it was nowhere to be found. So I quickly ran upstairs, put the clothes away, and run back downstairs. When getting into the living room, I asked my father if he'd gone to the restroom, seeing how he's 6'1", and he tells me no, which made me panic some more. I try to fall asleep that night, but I feel as if I'm being watched. 3 weeks later, my parents and brother went to bed, and I was sitting in the kitchen playing some Skyrim on my laptop when I felt a cold wind on my back. I, of course, turned to see what is occurring. When I see a shadowy hand appear across the backroom light, which led me to saying, of course, there's a ghost in my back room. Why wouldn't there be? I, of course, go back there to check, to see if my father had snuck in for some reason. But nobody was there to greet me. The supernatural activity stops, and after that, about 3 years later on March 25th, I was doing laundry in the back room, and as I unloaded the dryer with my ear to the window, I could hear a female voice whisper into my ear, which made me run out of there as fast as I could. Needless to say, my great-grandparents are still lingering in my house, and I'm sure they will be for years to come. When I was a junior in college, I studied abroad in Rome for 6 months. It was beautiful and amazing, and I was drunk for most of it. But the ghost was the best part. The apartment my roommates and I lived in was in this building that was built in the 1700s or something ridiculous like that, and it was pre-decorated from a family that lived there a few years before my program brought it out. It's important to note that the room I stayed in was decorated like a little girl's room. Think ABC wallpaper and butterfly stickers everywhere. Everything was pretty normal for the first few months until it came closer to our school's finals. One night, while I was laying in bed, I noticed that the corner looked extra dark. There was a street lamp outside that kind of lit up the room, but this was a pitch black nothingness kind of dark. When I looked closer to the spot, I saw what looked like a man with a flat-brimmed hat on. Screw that. Obviously, I ran to turn on the light, but no one was there anymore. I went back to bed and didn't sleep at all. This continued for the next week or so, and I saw the man a few more times. He didn't seem threatening after a while, and just kind of stood there. I mentioned it to my roommates whose bed was above mine one day, and she said that she had seen him too, which made us believe we were hallucinating from final stress. Then one night, a few days later, I'm laying down and feel the mattress dip like someone else is sitting on the bed. I looked and didn't see anything, but somehow, I just knew it was him. I lay there for a minute when I feel him put his hand on my leg, not in a creepy way, but more like in a comforting parent sort of way. I laid there still, not wanting to move until I somehow fell asleep. When I woke in the morning and told my roommate, thinking it must have been a dream or something, she told me the exact same thing had happened to her. We're both pretty sure we're going insane at this point. So we decide to ask our very old and very Italian neighbor if she had seen anyone near our apartment. This is when she tells us of the little girl that used to live in the room that my roommate and I are currently sleeping in, that she had drowned in the bathtub that we had been using all semester, and after she died, the dad killed himself from the grief. She then very casually told us that he had haunted the apartment ever since. She did not seem to think it was a big deal and offered us homemade bread and went back inside. After asking our other neighbors for more info, it seemed that the dad would comfort anyone who'd stayed in the little girl's room as a way to continue to comfort his daughter after she had died. I lived with my family in an apartment where our living room window and my bedroom faced the corridor. So, basically anyone could walk past our living room and bedroom window. That's why curtains is a must for privacy. So, I have my computer table set beside the window. So I play my PC games and my right side will be the window. So this one night at around midnight, I was playing my PC game and suddenly I slowly began to hear a breathing sound. Someone breathing heavily and loudly in continuous steady pace right beside the right side of me, which comes from the window behind my curtain. I completely freak out and decided to not open the curtain to see who the hell was doing that. I gather my family members to go into my room and listen as they're all able to hear it. Now the curtains are all drawn for bedroom and living room since it's so late at night. We slowly walked out to the main door, opened it slowly, and peeked out the corridor to see who the hell was doing the breathing sounds. No one was there. We were completely freaked out. Okay, my rational explanation was maybe that a person had ran and taken the stair lift down. We went back to my bedroom and we could still listen to that breathing sound. Still freaked out, we stayed away from that area and we weren't sure how long until it finally stopped. Heavy and loud breathing and steady paces behind the curtain and window. Freaking. Another time, I was talking to my friend via MSM webcam. Yes, this happened about 12 years ago. Showing him my clothes from my first virgin visit to the club. I walked out of my bedroom. This was in another bedroom since I'd changed bedrooms to get my clothes. When I came back to show her my clothes, she said, "Hey, I just saw your sister walk past. She's not home." She replies, "Yeah, short hair above the shoulder and plain blouse." I go, "No, she's not home. No one but me. I think you saw wrongly." She denies that she saw wrongly and we resumed our webcam conversation. That just freaked me out. She saw a ghost girl walking past my webcam when I was nearby. Why? Well, I never had a haunted house, but the street I grew up on was cursed. Everyone on the street built their houses new there, so it was a new development. It was all big properties, so probably like 10 on the street. Something really bad happened to every house there. One suicide, one hit and run with a death, one cancer and death, one guy fell off a ladder and broke his neck, one kid, 18, was declared mentally insane. There was even more crap that happened, but I can't remember the specifics. One bad thing happened per house, and our house got off light, i.e., no one died or became paralyzed. Our dad became abusive to my mom and older siblings, and it destroyed our family. My mom and us kids moved away, and the next people who moved into our house built a big garage shed, and then their teenage son hung himself in it about a year later. We found out later on that an Aboriginal elder, as this is in Australia, found rock markings warning to stay away from the area as there were very bad spirits there. I was in the 6th grade, staying the night at my buddy's house. Him and his older brother told me they had a ghost in their house, and that even the mom said she'd seen him. We were in his bonus room trying to watch Stand By Me, and I heard something on the roof above me, like footsteps walking on top of the roof. When I asked them if they heard that, they said that they were used to it and didn't even bother about when the movie finished. We went downstairs to get snacks, and when I let his puppy in from outside, I saw not one but 2 figures standing on the pool cover. I lost my shit and called my mom to pick me up and only went to his house when it was bright outside because I was terrified. From 3 to 13, I lived in a nice home out near Yosemite National Park. Nothing super spectacular about it. 4 bedrooms, a den, a dining room, the norm. Just down a little dirt road, and if you've ever been around those parts, you'll know, miles away from civilization. My whole childhood, I was visited by this girl in white. She never spoke. I would just wake up in the night and see or feel her there. I asked my dad, and his response every time was the men in our family can see ghosts. My rationale of this, as I'm a skeptic, was that we had some sort of mild schizophrenia running through our family. It didn't bother me. She didn't look like other people. There was something off about her. After my father died, my mother decided to sell the house and went through a realtor. We never once had contact with the buyers. I only knew them by name. The buyers had a son who went to the same school as our old neighbors, dear friends of the family. And the son apparently came to school without sleeping repeatedly, complaining that there was a girl who watched him at night and that he needed to get out. Sent shivers down my spine every time I remember this. My boyfriend and I had a child and he left to go fight fires in another state, and that's when things started happening. Before, weird things would happen, like glass would randomly fall off the counter in the middle of the night, but nothing particularly intense. First thing that happened after he left was one night. I was in the dining room alone, and the light dimmed by itself, turned off, and went back on. I thought it was weird, and a couple of days later, my daughter had fallen asleep in the car while driving, so I brought her inside in the seat and let her finish her nap in the living room. Our living room window was huge, so I went outside to throw the ball for the dogs, and I could still see her asleep in her car seat from the window. I started throwing the ball from the dogs. When I look inside the living room window, I notice a white mist floating from the stairs through the living room. I turned around to make sure it wasn't a cloud reflection or something and looked back into the living room to see it still inside. I flipped the hell out, grabbed my daughter, and drove 45 minutes to my mom's house and never stayed there alone again. I went to Denny's at 3 a.m. for steak. I was really craving it. On my drive up Harlem towards Niles, I passed a cemetery and saw a ghost of a woman walking slowly along the side of the road. Just as I was coming up beside her, she vanished. I slammed on my brakes, and shockingly, so did the car next to me. We both got out the car and looked at each other and asked if we'd just seen the same thing. We stood there for several minutes before a Parkridge cop pulled up behind us, asking if everything was all right. We told him we saw the woman, and he calmly said, "Oh, yeah, she often does that, but y'all need to keep moving now. You're blocking the road." I saw a shadow person in the apartment I lived in 3 years ago. I was standing outside on the balcony one night, looking in through the window. From there, I could see the kitchen and a small hallway where the bathroom was and the door to the bedroom. The kitchen lights were on, but there were no lights in the hallway, so it was a bit dim. I was waiting for my then boyfriend to come out of the bathroom because I wanted to tell him something. I looked down and adjusted my shirt for about 5 seconds, and when I looked up, I saw him walk into the bedroom. So I opened up the balcony door to call him over, just when the bathroom door opens and he came out. I stood there in silence, wondering who or what I'd just seen seconds ago. I went inside and quickly walked into the bedroom, expecting to see an intruder hiding in there, but it was empty. I clearly saw a man walk in there, one more like the silhouette of a man considering the dim light, and it took me about 20 minutes to be able to tell my boyfriend. The following nights, I tried to replicate the scene, but I never saw anything that even came close to that again. I never believed in ghosts. I still don't know what to believe. But I can tell you what happened in Newton. I moved into my friend's apartment. He explained to me that there's a whole 3rd floor that was unused. I was like, oh, great. This is a sweet deal. Cheap rent, whole floor, plenty of space. After the first week, nothing was really unusual. Though when the house settled, the closet door would pop open in the room next to me. This would only happen 2 to 3 times a week. The wood floors were very creaky, but all in all, the place got plenty of sunlight. Within the first month, I started getting creeped out for no reason. I would wake up in the morning as if I heard something walking around. I saw my friend's girlfriend walking in the other room while blankly staring at me. I said, "Hey," got up and walked over into the room, only to see that she wasn't there. Funny, I thought. Maybe I was partly dreaming, having just woken up or something. Eventually, I got more and more creeped out. Until one day, I was standing in the room, about to head downstairs, and I felt as if someone blew air in my face, at point blank, almost offensively. It was intense. My hair stood on end, and I calmly walked downstairs, and my friend's girlfriend asked me what was wrong. I calmly muttered, "Oh, nothing." Upstairs is haunted in a joking manner. Then my friend and his girlfriend started arguing, saying, "See, I told you." The argument progressed into a full-scale endless debate. I had found out that the landlord would not allow the tenants to use the 3rd floor for this very reason. He even said to only use the first and second floor of the building and was disclosed to be haunted on the lease paperwork. I remember when I was younger, my uncle told me a chilling story that happened to him. The paranormal activity happened right after his dad, my granddad, had died. My granddad's final days had dragged on and been sad and long. He was in his bed at the inn for weeks and he was very ill. One day, he just didn't wake up anymore. And although we all thought he was resting in peace, we were wrong. That's when unusual things began for my uncle. The night my grandfather died, he began to hear strange noises, as his run was directly next to my granddad's. The noises sounded like scratches against the walls. He would wake up, warily enter the room, and check if a stray cat or strange animal had entered. But when he went to look, nothing. These strange noises persisted for a week, but he didn't feel like telling anyone because he was afraid. But one day, when he fell asleep, he had a dream of what felt like a vision of a person holding his hand and leading him to a wardrobe in his father's room. It was a dark, creepy dream that made him uncomfortable. In the morning, he went to the wardrobe, and all that he found were his father's old clothes. He couldn't understand what he was looking for, if anything, but he felt uneasy. That night, the noise was different. It was as though there was a small earthquake in the bedroom next door to his, which was strange. How could there be an earthquake in an isolated room? We're used to earthquakes. They happen a lot in Colombia. And it was dark and somewhat slightly chilling, and he had a strong feeling that he should check. He remembers walking into the room, and even though it was just next door, it had felt as though the corridor had stretched a mile. It felt darker than usual, colder. The only thing he could hear now was the thud of his own heartbeat, which felt as though he was about to puke. When he entered the room, he headed for the wardrobe, which he says he can remember had a dark figure standing next to it, just like the one in his dream, leading him to it. He was too afraid to face it, but looked once more into the wardrobe, this time making sure he was thorough. He looked through all the pockets until he reached the coat my granddad used to wear. In the breast of the pocket, he found some papers. The papers seemed to be an apology for my grandmother. The details he didn't really want to disclose, but he mentioned that once the papers were found, the noises and hauntings were gone. He says today that he regrets not facing the figure that hovered by the wardrobe, for he knows it was his father. And his dad had led him to ensure that his mother, my grandmother, got the letters he had written. I think my grandfather felt as though he couldn't leave us until he made his peace with whatever he had to do. You made it to the end. Not everyone does. Thanks for staying with me in the dark. If you enjoyed these stories, give it a like and hit subscribe so we can meet again in the next nightmare. Sleep tight, or try to.